Potential Not Pathology, embracing creative and resourceful approaches to psychotherapy with author and therapist Dr. Paul J. Leslie.
Welcome to Potential Not Pathology, where we offer information and inspiration for mental health therapists who are interested in learning and applying unique therapeutic techniques and concepts into their work. With a focus on the potential each client brings to his or her therapy session, this program examines ideas and tools which can assist your clients on their journey toward healing. I'm Paul J. Leslie. I'm glad you are here. And I'm glad to be here today. I have a special interview with a very good friend of mine. He's one of my mentors. His name's Bill OHanlon, and many of you who are in the psychotherapy field have long heard of Bill. He's the best-selling author of over 35 books. He's been on Oprah. He's given workshops literally most all over the world. And he's, for God, I don't know how many years, I've been sharing the message that I'm trying to share at the core, that we need to focus on people's potential and not their pathology. Bill tells a little bit about his early start in getting involved as a psychotherapist, and he was a work-study student of the great psychiatrist Milton Erikson, who he learned so much from. Bill's the founder of solution-oriented therapy, inclusive therapy, and possibility therapy. He keeps refining his models. The more he learns, the more he needs to refine, which I think is important, because models that are not refined are dead on arrival, because we're always, hopefully, learning new things. Bill has been very instrumental in getting my work out. He helped to kind of guide me through the publishing process, and he talks a little bit about some of the online training programs he has for other therapists or other nonfiction writers who want to become published, as well as some of his upcoming trainings on hypnosis and solution-oriented therapy. It was really just a fun time, as always, talking to Bill. He's got a lot of energy, and I feed off that energy. He even blessed us with a song, and it was kind of neat to have him do that. Now, unfortunately, due to some issues on my end, my questions on my side, the audio's not as clear as on Bill's side, but you really should be listening to Bill more than to me anyway, so hopefully that won't be too distracting. Well, I hope you enjoy the interview, and I hope you gain some insight from Bill, because he's got a lot of great things to share. His website's www.billohanlon.com. That's BILOHANLON.com. So enjoy the interview. I certainly did. Bill OHanlon, welcome to Potential Not Pathology.
Thank you.
I am delighted to have you. I indirectly blame you for all of this.
All right, I'll take full blame and no responsibility. Okay.
Now, I just want to publicly acknowledge, as we get started, how much you've mentored me, and your friendship is encouraging me through kind of new ways to share my message and my interest with others, and I do appreciate it very much.
Well, I'm glad I've mentored and not tormented you, so that's good.
Well, for those few people who don't know you, could you just real briefly kind of give a background of how you came to get into the field of therapy and make a name for yourself?
Yeah, I went to university, and I was going to be a parapsychologist. You probably don't know this, but I was going to be like Ghostbusters kind of thing. So I was going to major in psychology, and during college I got depressed. I was, a pretty shy guy, and I was pretty isolated, wasn't eating well, and I had a few other issues, and I got really depressed, almost killed myself. A friend talked me out of it, and then I got more interested in psychology, and in psychology I found it was a little depressing, actually, when I studied it, until I came across the work of Milton Erickson, who I know had a big influence on you as well, yes, who seemed to have a different approach. Most of the other approaches, as the name of your book and your podcast say, it was focused on what was wrong with people, their pathologies, their deficits, their traumas, and Erikson seemed to be a resource-based solution-oriented therapist, and he was more interested in people's potentials, resources, strengths, abilities, even the things that they perceived as problems or that were problems for them, he could turn into assets and liability and instead of liabilities, and that really appealed to me. I ended up going to graduate school to become a marriage and family therapist, and even though I was shy, I started to argue with my professors, and I started to get very dissatisfied. And the same thing in my first jobs, because everyone else there seemed to be focused on what was wrong with people, and I was really interested in what was right with people, and that propelled me out of my shyness to become a speaker and a workshop presenter, because I thought, well, who do people in therapy listen to? They listen to people who give the workshops. That's who's influenced me. And then I realized a few years later, oh, they also listen to people who write books. Oh, no, I'm not a writer, but I have to overcome that, too. And so I became a writer, and I've written 35 books. I've taught, I've given probably, I haven't counted them up recently, but probably 3,600 talks all around the world in various countries. I've been to most continents, not Antarctica yet, but not Africa. But a lot of places teaching and spreading the gospel of potential, not pathology, and resources and strengths and not deficits. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. Well, what have you done lately? That's what I want to know.
No, well, actually, it's funny because about 6 years ago, I was just traveling all around the world, really crazy busy, had 4 kids that I just raised, and they just left home. But I thought as soon as they leave home, it'll be a little easier. It wasn't. I was still crazy busy. So I thought, you know, it looks to me like everything's heading towards the internet. As Wayne Gretzky said, skate where the puck is going to be, not where it is. And I thought it's all heading towards the internet. Even though I'm an older guy, I'm not a digital native, I thought I'm going to figure out this internet thing and I'm going to get off the road. I have post-travel stress disorder, jokingly, according to my fiance, who's a psychiatrist. And I just was on a lot of planes, made millions of miles on the airlines, and I've been doing online work recently. And so I have so much time now that I didn't used to have, that I went back to an earlier love, which I know you share as well, which is music. And I've been pursuing a career part-time as a professional songwriter. So that's what I've been doing lately.
That's wonderful. Do you find, as a side note, do you find that getting more into your music helps you to be more creative in the other areas of writing? And
Well, it's interesting because I think, like you, I've met a lot of therapists who are great artists in some way, usually musicians, but sometimes other arts, because I think there's something that art shares in common with therapy, and that is you have to learn your forms. You have to learn the craft of it. You have to learn the techniques and the methods and the philosophy of it and all that stuff. And then you have to improvise when you're in a situation. And that is creativity, I think, is improvising in the moment, letting yourself be fully in that moment and letting what comes through you come through. And I think that's very much like therapy, like art, like music. And so I find a lot of therapists have an interest in the arts or music, and I think it's very common.
Yeah. So you mentioned starting out. When you started out back in the dark ages as a therapist.
Yeah, Paleolithic, I think.
Yeah, that's Did you sometimes just feel like you were fighting an uphill battle during the 70s and 80s?
I definitely did. I don't know, I can't remember who said that, but Einstein or somebody said, somebody, and they said, when you first propose a radical idea, everyone hates it, thinks it's nonsense, it's terrible, it's heresy. And then there comes a time when everyone just, accepts it and it really gets mainstream. And then everybody says, well, everybody already knew that, and it wasn't true. I remember a day when everybody didn't already know about strengths and potentials, and there were glimmers of it. I mean, I think Abraham Maslow said that in the 50s. Carl Rogers said a little bit of it, and there were a few people that were kind of holding out that torch, but mostly it wasn't mainstream, especially in clinical work, in psychotherapy. And when I first started teaching, I mentioned I was kind of a shy guy, and it was hard for me to get up in front of people. And within months, when I started teaching this strength-based and solution-oriented stuff that I teach, someone inevitably, by about 10:30 in the morning, on the first day of whatever workshop I was teaching, would stand up and say, what this guy is telling you is dangerous. It's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. I'm leaving. I suggest you all leave. And I was just stunned with the hostility. I'm like, all I'm doing is trying to help people and talking about a different way of doing that. And why would somebody attack me so viciously? But it was such a radical idea at the time. People just couldn't believe it. Even the brief therapists at the MRI, I got into a tiff with Paul Vatsevich, who said, if people had solutions, they wouldn't come to therapy. What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, they have solutions. But like Erikson said, they don't know that they know, and our job is to help them know they know. No, that is ridiculous. Why would they come to therapy? They would just solve the problem on their own. No. So even for a brief therapist, it was hard to understand that people had their own solutions and their own resources that you could draw upon. And so I got a lot of hostility at first. Now everybody's like, of course, positive psychology, solution-focused therapy, solution-oriented therapy, strength-based therapy, competence-based. It's very common. It's also more common in medicine, where people are empowering patients rather than the doctor always the expert. Patients are getting empowered in business. The staff is getting empowered. So I think it's not such a radical idea in this era, but it was a radical idea in that era. And it was non-orthodoxy, and I got a bit attacked, but, you know, I survived somehow.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of, if I can call it, your model of therapy is you've kind of played with the semantics of it.
I have.
Now, where are you now? And for those listening, I remember, I think, when we first met, it was solution-oriented, which you still use, I think.
I do, yes. Well,
kind of doing inclusive and possibility therapy.
Possibility therapy. I'll tell you, I try to rebrand it because I would say I'm solution-oriented, and people say, oh, yeah, you and Steve DeShazer. And I really disagreed with some. DeShazer was a friendly colleague of mine, but I disagreed with some of the things that he said, and I think... Right. I just got this question yesterday, actually, from somebody by email. What's the difference between solution-oriented and solution-focused? And I said, solution-oriented is less formulaic. It's more tolerant of talking about problems. It doesn't insist upon talking about solutions. And it's more relational. I think that one of the things, you know, some people are still around who knew Steve DeShazer. He wasn't big on eye contact. He wasn't big on emotional presence in therapy. He was a very brilliant guy, but he wasn't big on relationships. And to me, therapy change is a lot about connection. And I think the research is showing that now. You know, Scott Miller has been out touting, you know, if you have a good therapist with client alliance, that goes for a lot of the change process. The second biggest part of it is client resources. So I think that I was early on, and so people kept getting him confused. So I changed it to possibility therapy for a while. And then I came up with an entirely new approach called inclusive therapy that derives from Erikson's work as well. I really grabbed almost everything from Erikson. I've learned from other people as well, but he was such a profound influence. I was his gardener while I was in graduate school because I couldn't afford to pay him, and he had such a profound impact on me. And he really was the seed of all of those approaches. Possibility therapy, because he'd like to open possibilities for people. Solution-oriented therapy, because he was big on people having their own solutions and resources and strengths and abilities. And inclusive therapy, because he was big on bringing everything in as an asset rather than a liability. So I've done all those, and I'm kind of a restless guy, you know. As I told you, I'm pursuing a career as a professional songwriter, and I've written 35 books, and I've traveled all around the world. You can tell there's been a bit of restlessness to my life. I love the new thing.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
In some ways.
Well, yeah. Talking about solutions, it seems to me in your approach, you know, from talking with you and obviously reading your work, it's you're defining solution a little differently than DeShazer and Berg did. I mean, they seem to be, as in the therapist is actively creating, they're more involved in creating the solution, and I may be wrong about this, but it sounds like you're saying, well, they can find their own solutions. We just need to facilitate the conditions for them to find those resources.
I think that's right. And I think, you know, there was a book written in the narrative tradition, which is this sort of a kissing cousin of both solution-focused and solution-oriented. It's resource-based and non-pathologizing. And the book was called The Archaeology of Hope. And I really like that sense of, you know, digging through the rubble of the problem to find the solution, which I think is there. Occasionally people need some skill building. But yeah, I think DeShazer and Berg were into the co-construction of solutions. And I think that I have a grace model of psychotherapy, of change. That is, that people already have pre-existing abilities, conditions, assets, resources, strengths, and all those potentials that they could develop in whatever direction that they're going to develop. I don't need to tell them or guide them so strictly. And that's why I, after a while, started calling it possibility therapy, because all I'm trying to do is create a context for possibility to show up where they've been stuck. And that's it. It's pretty simple, really.
Well, if you say it's simple, and I agree, but I find
simple but not easy sometimes.
You got it. You got it. I find in a lot of my workshops when I'm teaching, people are that's great, the idea of shifting context, but can you give me a technique how to do it? Do you find that a lot of people need that kind of guide, roadmap, if you will?
I think that yes, and I think, it's a funny thing because you teach and I do. And I think one of the first things you need to do is help people make the mindset shift, because if they lay a technique on top of, oh, I need to do this with this Axis 2 borderline personality, but they'll never really change because their personality disorder it's going to slide off like, Teflon. And so I think that both of us, I know, because I know your work a bit and I've read your book, that is, we spend a bit of time on here's the kind of background and philosophy of this that allows the techniques to arise sometimes spontaneously. Now here's some techniques. So, I think it is good to have techniques. I was desperate for that when I first got out of graduate school. It's like they shoved me in a room with someone with real problems. I'm like, well, what do I do? And I really loved having technique to hold on to. But I think, it's the tried and true thing where the originator of the approach never is as rigid as the followers, who try and find some sort of formula and orthodoxy to hang on to and to use sometimes a little too rigidly, I think, in terms of what might help people in the moment. Most of the time, those formulas and methods work, except when they don't.
The exceptions, and that's a big part of your work too, is looking for exceptions, like, when are you doing something right, as opposed to when you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, or what, when I was a kid, they used to have this highlight children's magazines, and they used to have a picture in there, and they'd put some incongruent object in the picture, and they say, what doesn't fit with this picture? And I'm just like, wow. You told me that this kid is incorrigible and he's up in the middle of the night feeding the baby, because no one else can get the baby to sleep. I'm sorry, that just doesn't fit. I just don't get it. You have to explain to me how this kid is incorrigible and there's nothing good about him when he does that. And they're like, oh, I guess you're right. I just go for those things like a heat-seeking missile. It's like, wait a minute. They'll come in and they'll say, oh, after I left the last session, I had a couple of good days, and then the rest of the week went to crap, and I'm like, a couple of good days? Tell me about those. I'm really interested in those. I find those bad, and then we'll hear about the crap days. That's fine. I don't mind talking about the crap days, but I want to put it all in context, and I think sometimes people take one side of the seesaw. It's all terrible or it's all great. We've got this kind of positive thinking in America. If you just, do enough affirmations, you'll be rich and parking spots will show up in New York City, magically. And I think that's sort of that positive, magical thinking that's part of the American zeitgeist. And I think there's a danger to that. And there's a danger to negative thinking. People are Axis 2 and they'll never change, or they've been traumatized so much that they'll never be able to get over it. I think those things neither of those are so good. The middle way might be nice at times.
Yeah, might be nice. I think the Buddha said that too.
I think there was something about Buddha in the middle way. But I think I do lean a little more over into the positive expectancy, solution, strengths, ability side, because I think human beings are influenced by those positive expectations. They're just not determined by them, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the current state of psychotherapy? I just want to preface this by saying that as much of the good stuff I'm seeing, and this is my exception, I'm still seeing almost a desire in some places to go backwards into the pathology model.
Yes, it's a constant thing, isn't it? I think that there's here's my bias, I think, that when I'm doing something like playing music, I'm just doing it, and I don't really notice things until I make a mistake, and then I'm jarred awake. So I think there might be a little bit of a human bias to notice what doesn't work and what goes wrong, because it was probably a survival thing when the tigers were after us, and we could get very easily killed out in nature. Now life is not quite so dangerous for some of us, but we still have that natural tendency to notice much more what hasn't worked, what isn't working, what might not work, and to attend to that and to preempt it, and if we can, or avoid it. So I think that maybe there's a bit of a bias, and that always seems to creep back in, which is why you have to do the work you're doing and have this podcast and write those books and go out and speak. And I have to do that as well. And I'm trying to leave a legacy in terms of all those books, but also online courses so that they can last as long as there's digital information in the world, because I fear the encroaching tide of the pathology tsunami, which could wipe us out if those of us don't put up a wall to stop that thing from sweeping over psychotherapy again, as it has many, many times.
Many times, indeed. I'm just going to take a quick detour because you brought it up. Your online classes, I was fortunate to take one of those, which was actually very helpful, actually, to get my first major book published.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to just take a minute or two, and could you tell us about some of the classes you offer online, anything new coming up?
Yeah, actually, I have three. When I first figured out how to do online courses, I went wild because I'm quite a creative, as you say, and a prolific guy, and 35 books, and I have a lot of interest in a lot of things. And I made 12 courses right away. I thought, well, what a month. And then I had a mentor who said, no, Bill, focus. You're a little restless, you're a little scattered, focus, and choose the two you think are the most likely to make the biggest contribution and succeed the best. Focus on those, make them as successful as you can, get them out to as many people as you can. So I did, and partly I wanted to stay home, so I wanted them to earn a certain amount of money. So I have one that you took, which is how to write your book and get it published. Having done 35 books, people come up to me and ask me, how do you do that? And it's more than a 5-minute conversation. So I put all my best knowledge online, and then I do coaching with it. I do some group coaching calls and some online written coaching. And I've had over 200 books get published out of my coaching, which I'm very proud of. I'm going for 1,000 before I go off the planet. See if we can make a difference, because the planet seems to need a little help. And then I do one on Ericksonian hypnosis once a year, again, because it's pretty intense. It has a lot of coaching with it. Online, it has videos, audios, worksheets, task assignments, and then you can practice with people over Skype, actually, as we're recording this, but video Skype. And then I've just created, for me, what is my legacy course, which is the solution-oriented approach. We talked about this, to change, which can be used not just in therapy, but in businesses and organizations and for self-help. And there's a spiritual part of it. And I've really put down what I think is the definitive version. After writing a bunch of books about it, it's become simpler and more profound to me as time goes on. So I thought, I better get the final version down. I'm not getting any younger. I'm in my 60s, and I want to make sure I leave this legacy. And I just launched that, actually, this week. It's just starting. We're recording this at the end of May 2016, and it's just opening in the next few days. So.
Excellent, excellent. Again, anyone who's listening, I highly recommend any of these courses, because one thing I like about the online courses, and I've trained with you live as well, and both are wonderful, but the online, it's I get a lot of the feedback that the other therapists and writers and people like that give.
Well, I taught hypnosis live for the same organization, and the first online course I taught was on hypnosis years ago. And we did a survey at the beginning of my live workshop, which was a 3-day intensive, and the beginning of the hypnosis workshop, which was an 8-week intensive. We surveyed people how much they knew about hypnosis, how much they were using it, and then at the end of both of the live and the online one, And at the end of the online one, they were using it much more. And I was a little surprised about that because I was a little skeptical you could teach hypnosis online. But what I find is that group support is really good. More than that, it goes over time. So you get a chance to go out, try it, come back and watch it again or listen to it again. And you get a chance to ask questions over time. And you can go over the material as many times as you want. So I find that's a better learning atmosphere in some ways. There's nothing to beat live. It's like going to a live concert. You can watch a video or listen to a CD or a streaming audio. It's not the same as being at a live concert, but there's something nice about being able to listen to that great solo 15,000 times instead of once. And it's just ephemeral. And so I think that's true for online stuff. So people are interested in this stuff. They can just go to my general site, BillOHanlon.com. And as OHanlon is spelled OHanlon. In real life, it has an apostrophe, but the internet does not allow apostrophes on web names. And you can go to thenewhypnosis.com to find out about the hypnosis course. Getyourbook.written.com to find out about the book writing course.
That's excellent. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about, we already mentioned Dr. Erickson. I know that he was just probably one of the most influential people on not just your work, but your life.
Yes.
And I wanted to kind of ask you, are there any nuggets out of all the many diamonds that were just laying around that you picked up, one or two that really just made the most impact on you from his rather paradoxical work?
Yes, I mean, I think two things really had the biggest influence on me. There's hundreds, but two that stand out as you ask that question. First one he said to me one time, which is a tried and true philosophy, I guess, but he said it in such a charming way. He said, if you fall on your face, at least you're heading in the right direction, which I loved because, since before that, I was sort of a Walter Mitty type. I would sort of fantasize and dream about things. But after that, it was like he really showed me you've got to do things. You got to try things. You got to go out in the world and make things happen. And you're going to fall on your face because you don't know what you're doing sometimes. But at least you're heading in the right direction. You're moving forward. So I like that. He was kind of an optimistic guy in general in life. He also said, this is slightly different but related, he said, in the Erickson family, we see troubles as the roughage of life. So there was nothing wrong with trouble. It was part of life, and it also helped you move forward, using that analogy of roughage. And then the other thing was the stories. I was trained as a therapist, and I thought you were supposed to ask a question, listen to the person talk for a while, feed back to them what they said in a very empathic and emotional way, and that was therapy. And what Erikson was doing was really different. He would look at the ground and tell 3 or 4 stories. And it was astounding to me. I was like, where's the back and forth? Because he would ask a question or two, and he would observe, and he would talk to you. But he would tell lots of stories, and I'll tell you, that has made a big difference in my life. I'm a big storyteller. I love stories. I had to learn to tell them. I did not know how to do it. I wasn't a natural storyteller, like I wasn't a natural writer or speaker. And I learned to do all those things. And I think that's probably, sorry, I said 2, but here's the third thing, that you can learn anything. And he was such an optimistic guy, and he believed in human learning. I think Erikson was a neuroplastic theorist before there was neuroplasticity was discovered. He believed people could change and learn all through life. And at the time, his fellow psychiatrists and neurologists did not believe that. They thought it was medically impossible for adults to grow new brain cells and make major new connections and change the function of their brain. And Erikson believed that neurologically you can make those changes, physiologically you can make those changes. He believed in plasticity and change and learning all through life, and boy, that influenced me. I'm in my 60s. I'm still loving learning stuff, and I think it keeps you alive.
Yeah, his optimism, you're definitely right. And for those who don't know, Dr. Erickson was in most of his life, particularly his later years, in a lot of severe pain due to polio. And he had, and a lot of you guys, when you met him, he was basically an older man.
He was in his 70s.
Oh yeah, so you got to see him at the height of his knowledge, but also at the kind of the lowest functioning of his body.
Well, and that was, what you're saying was really interesting, because he was the youngest person in the room. He looked around the environment and at me as if he was just about to discover, experience, learn something amazing. His eyes were so alive, and his body was racked with pain, as you say, and quite physically infirm. But I think it's the way he kept himself out of pain. He externally oriented towards, what am I going to discover? What am I going to learn? And here he was in his late 70s, and totally the youngest person in the room, no matter who was in the room.
Yeah, that's a story Steve Gilligan told me one time. He said that they had to start late one day at a training, and because Erikson had such severe pain, he had to kind of get himself centered for a couple of hours to even go in and talk to them. And Steve, who's a very empathic guy, turns to Erikson and says something to the extent of, Dr. Erickson, with all this pain you have to deal with, how do you find the ability to get up in the morning? And Erikson just looked at him and he says, I drink 2 big glasses of water when I go to bed.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one. He just had that wonderful lightness to him and that sense of humor. And he could be kind of tough, and he could also be super, super funny and light, and didn't take himself all that seriously. We're all bozos on this bus, he said one time.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Erikson, and he could be funny, he could be tough. I wanted to ask you just real quickly about your thoughts on behavioral flexibility on the part of a therapist. We all have our personalities that are different, but have you found it's just crucial for your own behavior when you were working with clients that you had to be comfortable going different places?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you know my bias and I know it's your bias to stay away from pathology and analytical stuff that kind of go back to the past. Mm-hmm. I've had a few clients that's what they needed, and I'm like, oh, this is not my preference, but I'm going there because that's what they need, and that was really hard for me to be that flexible. But I'll just tell you one quick story. When I was studying with Erikson, I was in graduate school, and I had a year-long class. It was a pro seminar on psychotherapy. There were 5 of us in the class. And the teacher said, your final paper is going to be 40 pages, like 3/4 of your grade is going to be based on that. We're going to have discussions in class. You're going to do a bunch of readings. But in the end, in the last couple months of the year, she gave us the assignment for the paper, and it was write a 40-page paper on your favorite theorist. And of course, I'm going to choose Erikson. I'm studying with him at the time. I'm totally obsessed and fascinated. And then she delivers the bad news, which is half the paper is supposed to be on their theory of psychopathology, half the paper is supposed to be on their theory of change. And I'm like, shoot, or intervention. I'm like, I'm in deep trouble here because Erikson didn't have much of a theory of psychopathology. Right. And so I searched through everything, and finally I had to go to my teacher and say, I can only find about 3 paragraphs that I can write on Erikson's theory of pathology. And then she said, well, then just do 39 pages on his theory of intervention and theory of change. So I can do that. And my 3 paragraphs were just as you said. Erikson's idea of how people get in trouble is, we're a little too rigid, we should be a little more flexible. And that includes patients, clients, and therapists. So I thought that was a funny thing. I was like, that's the best I could come up with. That's the most theory I could find in Erikson's work. Yeah. There wasn't much theory of pathology. And so your book and your podcast is appropriately titled Pathology, not potential, not pathology. He was not interested in pathology.
Yeah. What I'm finding is when I was doing research on my book, I went back and looked, and everyone, and I do mean everyone who worked with him in those early days, when in the 40s and 50s and even the 60s, they all thought he was insane, and he got so much flack, and now some of us are just marveling at his brilliance. And do you find that, and you've known many well-known, therapists throughout the years, do you see that as a similar kind of thread that the old guard goes, this new guy is a clown, he's a joke. And
yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing. Some people literally thought he had a psychotic break and he was insane because he was so different from other people. The psychiatrists in Phoenix had nothing to do with him. When I was there, I had a family therapy teacher who used to refer clients to him. She also thought he was very weird, but she thought he was brilliantly weird. But yeah, I think, again, it's that same thing we started with, is the orthodoxy says that's crazy, it can't work, this guy is crazy, this person is crazy, and then it's like, oh yeah, okay, this has some merit to it. And then of course, everybody always knew Erikson was a genius. He was this, clinical genius. Everybody knows it. And then, of course, the other thing, which I fought against all my career, was he was an eccentric genius and no one can do what he did. Now, no one will be Erikson, obviously, like no one will be Paul Leslie, but
thank God.
Everybody, yeah, really, that is a blessing, I suppose. Or Bill OHanlon, that's a blessing. But you can extract things from his wisdom and his expertise that you can use with your own personality and in your own style. And I think that's the message I try to get across, to demystify this mystical, mystifying genius therapist, psychiatrist, hypnotherapist, storyteller, and extract from him some of the things he did so that the rest of us can use some of them to make our change work more powerful and more empowering.
Yeah. When you've done kind of consulting or supervision or things like that with therapists in the past, how would you deal with therapists who they've got all the information, they might even know more technical than you, but yet they don't trust themselves to just get in and let it fly? How did you kind of help them?
I would tell them stories. And my favorite story was a student we had at our clinic who was an intern, a social work student, a master's degree, was finishing up her master's work, and she came in and she would sit on staff meetings and she would sit on trainings, because I was doing a lot of trainings at the center at that time. And within a couple of months, she was doing hypnosis and brief therapy and Ericksonian stuff and really focused on resources and getting a lot of change in her work. And I was like, Audrey, her name was Audrey Berlin. I said, Audrey, it took me years to learn this stuff. I can't believe, how did you learn it so quickly and master it? And she said, well, I hear something, I learn something, I go into my next client, and I say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just heard this and it sounds intriguing. Would you like to try it? She said, sometimes they say no. I want you to know what you're doing before you do it. But most of them like, yeah, okay, let's try it. Anything that helps. And she said, a lot of times I'd fall on my face and it wouldn't work. And I'd go back to and ask the questions afterwards about what I didn't know. But she said, I just tried it. And I thought, that's the key. I would read books, go to trainings, read more books, go to trainings. It'd take me years to get up the nerve to try, because I just thought, I'm not ready, I don't know enough. And finally, after she told me that story, I thought, well, I'm discarding the Bill OHanlon technique of learning and trying new things. I'm going to adopt the Audrey Berlin method. So the Bill OHanlon method is available for any of you listening. If you would like to try it, obsess for years, think you don't know enough, and I tell them that story. And I think the key is, again, you fall on your face, at least you're heading in the right direction, but you don't learn much. You have to have some background and some knowledge, but mostly we learn on the job when we're living and when we're doing change work.
I totally agree. Was there a point for you to where all these things that you've learned, and again, I put a lot of emphasis on Erikson because obviously that was one of my heroes, but you've been fortunate to kind of, you've hung out due to just the nature of a good fortune. Many of the brilliant therapists of the last 30 or 40 years, soaking all that information up. And was there a point where after you did something, like you finished a session or it occurred to you that you had internalized all of that and you're trying to tell someone else about a case and they think you're from Mars now?
No, I think I'm more charming and have a better way of saying it, a more gentle and inclusive way. I think Erikson was tougher to learn from because he didn't make things explicit. He told a lot of stories, but I tell stories and I make things explicit, and I know how to sort of put it in a way that slides right in. I think that's one of the things I learned from Erikson is how to communicate with the non-conscious as well as the conscious, and to do both. So I don't find that much resistance to, or people looking at me like I'm from Mars anymore. I don't get those people that stand up at 10:30 and attack me, haven't in years. And partly that's that inclusive stuff. And we joked about it early on. I would say, this stuff always works, except when it doesn't.
Right.
That disarms the people that are like, they want to get up and attack you and tell you the exception to the rule. I found in a group, if you say something that's absolutely definitive, like this is the way it always is, somebody will jump up at one point or another, one way or another, usually kind of angrily or in a challenging way, and say that's not always the way it is, and here's another way. And that is, I think, the greatest learning from teaching that I've gotten, is to include, not to be so righteous, not to be so, we're recording this when there's a presidential election, not to be so Donald Trump certain, to be forthright in your views, but not to say this is the only way and you have to believe my way or else you're wrong. And
Well,
if
you're
you
saying
make
that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, if you make people wrong, you're going to polarize people, which is useful in some contexts, but I don't prefer to do that when I'm teaching, because I want to influence people to adopt my my views, which I think are right.
Well, you've given us a lot of gold here, but there's one question that I'm going to ask you. I don't think I've ever asked you.
All right, and I have to tell you, just to warn you, so I've got my guitar right here, and I'm thinking we're talking about Erikson. I should play the song I wrote for Erikson before we end, but go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. People who have not heard of you, I'll say, oh, well, one of my friends, mentors, Bill OHanlon, and they're in the field. And they go, no, I think I've heard of that guy. They get it. Did he write that book? Did he do that seminar? But I say he was on Oprah.
That's it.
It's like
that's
suddenly,
my big claim to fame.
Jesus is walking across the damn water.
It's true. Before I was on Oprah, I would be introduced at workshops or talks, and I noticed the reaction. And then after I was on, and that slid into my bio, boy, people sit up a little more straight. Like, what? This guy was on Oprah? Oh, I guess I should pay attention. So yeah, that's a great claim to fame. I was on with my book, Do One Thing Different, which was my popularization of Erikson's work and solution-oriented approaches and some of the early brief therapy kind of pattern change approaches that I love.
Mm-hmm. Was your experience doing that a little different than what you'd been used to as far as interacting in a public forum with your ideas?
It was. I hate to say it because I admire her in many ways, but she seemed off that day and she wasn't very nice, Oprah. But she sold a lot of books for me. That was a helpful thing. And she got the word out about the books. And by the end of the show, she seemed to get the idea. She's smart as a whip. And she also, I was surprised, she did like stand-up comedy in where the commercial breaks would be. She entertained the crowd, so that was pretty amazing. And speaking of Donald Trump, she said the day I was on, not for television consumption, but in the break, she said, I'm sorry I'm late coming out. I was in makeup when the Donald called and told me he was going to recommend that I be his vice president for the third party that he was thinking of running for. And she told him, and the crowd erupted and said, yes. And she said, no way. I love my day job. I would never be in politics. So I think I heard some scuttlebutt recently. He was thinking of asking her again, which would be a good strategic maneuver, but I don't think she'd do it.
I don't think so.
I hope she doesn't.
Well, Maestro, you got something to play for us, and I'd love to hear it. Go for it.
I don't know how this will come across because I don't have a professional mic in front of me. Sorry, I wasn't tuned up.
No worries.
All right, so I mentioned before that when I was in graduate school, I couldn't afford to pay Erikson. He kindly allowed me to be his gardener in exchange for his teaching. And I went back to Arizona after he died, and I was really sad that I didn't have a chance to discuss with Dr. Erickson some of the insights I'd come to on his approach. I'd written a book called Taproots, and I've gone on to write a few other books about his work, and I would have really liked to talk to him about it, but he was gone, and so I was staying at a friend's house, and I wrote this song. I worked in your garden, I really grew a lot. Most of the things you taught me, I'm sure that I forgot. So I had to start all over with a garden of my own. And I wish that you could see it in the ways that I have grown. You plant a seed and you don't know what will grow, but you get what you need, 'cause something inside you knows. You gave me room, and now that you are gone, my garden is in bloom, and you're seeds will carry on. When winter breezes blow, you might think they'll never end, but every gardener knows the spring brings life again. Rain and the sunshine, the nighttime and the day, everything you know will soon be here today. Planted good seed and you don't know what will grow, but you get what you need, something inside will know. You gave me room, and now that you are gone, the garden is in bloom, and it's time to carry on.
Wow.
Well, aside from forgetting one of the verses, so I just improvised, and the guitar being slightly out of tune, that's my song called Transplants.
Needs more cowbell.
It's cowbell, more cowbell, of course.
Love it, love it. And yeah, the lyrics, it just, that just tells me how much of an impact that Uncle Milton did have on you, and that's beautiful.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great, man. Thanks so much for
thank
being
you, Paul.
with me today,
It was
Bill.
always nice to talk to you. I remember we saw each other in December, and that was too short a visit, but it was nice to chat with you, and thank you for having me on to let me infect as many people as I can with this philosophy that I know you share. So we're spreading the virus of possibility and strengths and potential.
And there's no cure, because I got
cure.
a fever for
Absolutely.
cowbell.
We got the more cowbell, more fever. There you go.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening to Potential Not Pathology with Dr. Paul J. Leslie. If you enjoyed the show, check out our website at potentialnotpathology.com, where you will find programs and articles showcasing unique and creative therapeutic applications.